Okay, so yeah, last class you guys got some exposure and practice with Django authentication or using authentication with Django. It's got some built-in stuff. Um, so can anyone tell me a little bit about what you've done with authentication?
Created a username and password that we then use to generate a token.
Uh-huh.
And then that token is what we actually use to access the API or access it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, exactly. So when you create a user, I mean, this is like the UI equivalent is signing up for something, right? So if you create an account or sign up for whatever, uh, you're gonna end up as a row in a database somewhere. You know, sign up for Twitter or whatever. You're gonna end up as a row in a database. There's gonna be a user's database or something like that, and you're gonna have email, password, et cetera, et cetera. Um, And of course, the password is not going to be stored in plain text. It's going to be hashed and salted, and there's some fancy stuff that you'll almost always use built-in solutions for. And Django comes with a fair amount of that stuff pre-packaged, so you don't have to directly implement it yourself. So you get a username and password. So at some point, you're going to have to send those actual like base credentials, right? And then once you have an account created, excuse me, once there's a row in that user database, then as a secondary process, and this could either happen like automatically or as a second step explicitly, is there'll be some token associated with your account. So we can take a look at how Django does. Let's just take a look at how Django does it actually. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna clone down. I'll just skip ahead a little bit and clone this down. You're gonna check out that's fine. So the branch that I want, I think, for today is with course middleware. So I'll check out that branch. All right. And then I'm gonna go ahead and run the migrations real quick, and we can take a look at the table. So I'm gonna run Docker compose first. So Docker, this is just to get the database up. So we can look at the compose file. This is the same stuff we've seen over and over again. We're just spinning up a database container. So Docker compose up -d. And then once that finishes, we'll also create a virtual environment. We can install all the Django stuff. But so conceptually, if you're implementing your own user system or user authentication system, you could either have a user table, and then you could have the username, password, email, whatever, and then you could have another column in that same table. It's like token or whatever, or you might have another table, like a token table, and then you could connect those with a foreign key. So I'm going to create a virtual environment. activate it. Also install the requirements. And then I'm going to run migrations after that. Okay, so Python manage migrate. Okay, so it's applying all this stuff. So all these auth tables. You can see there's a whole bunch of stuff here. We looked at that initially when we first were exposed to Django. We looked a little bit at that stuff, but we can take another look. So one thing we have we've done in the settings is we've added another app, right? This is all built-in stuff. This just comes automatically when you use Django. This is a third-party app that we're installing, and then here's basically like another third-party add-on app, and then this is ours. So because we've added this, we're going to get some extra stuff free. So these migrations are run. So I'm going to try and connect to the database. So PSQL. Let's see. Go to here. Okay. Is there a question? E is 5454, and dash D is lines. I can't think of all the. What is the dash H? Is post. So yeah, I didn't pass in the URL or the wherever the server is running from, in this case localhost, and then the password is host res. All right, so I can describe the database tables here, /d / the other slash. Okay, so I have auth group, auth user, auth permission, auth user groups. So there's a whole bunch of stuff here. Auth token. So let's take a look at let's do auth user first. So I can do select star from auth user. And we see we have a bunch of fields here, right? We have an ID, which shouldn't be surprising, password. We also have some other information that we're not going to use directly, but last login is super user, username, first name, last name, email, blah, blah. So we have so this is just a normal table. And if you were going to implement your own user authentication system, you'd probably want something like this. Doesn't have to be exactly like this, but at the very least, you'd want password, username. Okay, and then we can also see the auth token token table. So select star from, and we have a key, a created, and a user ID. So what is user ID? Probably.
It's probably associated with the ID field and auth user.
Yeah, exactly. It's probably a foreign key that's connected to the auth user table. So let's try auth token. And we can see, so we can get a little bit more information about the, the metadata, information about the table itself here. And we see auth token, token P key, primary key, B tree key. Can anyone tell me what this is doing? You can take a guess or just tell me anything that you think might be true.
Like going through a binary tree.
Okay, good. Yeah. So this is a binary tree. We don't. So yeah, I would not worry about this. So it's a B tree. I don't think it's technically binary tree is different than a B tree. A B tree is a data structure you'll see in databases. So it's not binary. You can actually have a node can have lots of different children. But so what this is doing, it's telling us that key, which is one of the columns here, is the primary key. So this is a primary key, and the type is a string, basically. And the maximum length of the string is 40 characters. So it looks like this is going to be the actual token, right? So the token is going to be, basically like a random. In this case, tokens, there are different kinds of tokens with different, different properties, but this is like the very simplest version. It's just going to be a bunch of random characters, basically. And then we have right here. So what's happening right here? Sorry, what's happening right here?
That just indicates that the user ID is a foreign key that's pointing at the ID on the auth user table.
Yeah, exactly. So this user ID is a foreign key, which references that, which is what we guessed, but we can confirm that guess by looking at the metadata from the table. And again, this is stuff that you could implement this exact thing in raw SQL, but Django is doing this for you. So when you installed that app right here, part of what happened is Django included a migration that created these tables. So that's what's happening at a at a very low level inside the database. All right. Okay, so at some level, it's just it's just a table. You have a user table. You create an account. You create the user email, whatever. You sign up, and then at some point, you can also have a token associated with that user, which is stored in that other table, and then those tables are connected via a foreign key. And the way that works, basically, we'll kind of see this in practice, but the way it works is anytime you make a request, so I create a user, I get a token, that token is associated with the user in the database, and then anytime I want to access a protected resource, I include that token in the request, and then the code inside Django, inside the views and inside the middleware is going to have access to that, and it can actually look it up in the database. So I include the request, hey, hello, I would like to make a GET request to /wine/1. Here's my credential. Before a response is generated, Django is going to check it in the database. Hey, here's the user. The user is giving me this token. Is this a valid token? Okay, great. So you can now access that. Okay. Any questions about that?
Where it said deferrable, initially deferred, what does that mean?
That's a good question. I'm not 100% sure. Let's look it up real quick. I'm guessing that what it means is that you just don't have to, it's basically optional. So what did that say?
Yeah, I was doing a quick Google on it, and I didn't see anything immediately that made a lot of sense to me.
So when a constraint is deferred, it is not validated until the transaction commits. Yeah, so it looks like basically, I'm not sure why they would do that exactly, but it's something that needs to be created separately. So so we'll see. We'll actually create this, and then we'll see in the database that you can create a user without creating it. Sorry, give me 1 sec here. Yeah, so I could, I'm not entirely sure about all of the details, but okay. All right, so I'm not going to talk about this, but I've included it. So you can actually create your own middleware pretty easily. And so to make this example a little easier, we're going to use basically create some custom cores middleware, and we'll look at that right over here. So here's a custom middleware class that basically just adds some headers that says, hey, basically anyone can access this resource from anywhere. And if you want to create your own middleware, yeah, there's some references in the README, but you basically just need to create a class like this, and then you implement this call method, and you can do stuff to the request. So the request and response objects will basically get passed through all these essentially functions. So this is a class, but you can also do it as a function. And the request and response objects will get passed around, and there's a lot of built-in middleware right here, which includes, so I added this custom one right here, but all the built-in stuff is right here. So a bunch of security stuff, mostly, and a few other things. Okay. All right. So that's the middleware. So if we look, yeah, well, all right. Let's skip ahead to the actual credential flow. So last class you guys actually implemented this, and you can see the flow here. So this is a sequence diagram, tells you about the steps that are involved and what happens when. So initially you're going to create a user or sign up, whatever you want to call it, and you're going to send a username and a password to this endpoint, in this case sign up, and it's going to create a row in the user table right here. And we can see that. So in this case, we're going to /signup. So we can actually trace through our code and figure out where that's happening. So we'll start at the top level URLs, and we go to /accounts, and that's going to pass the request on to the accounts URLs, and that's right here, accounts URLs. And then when we sign up, if it's /account/signup, this pattern will match, and it will call this view. So this sign up view is in the views. It inherits from create API view. So we're creating something. So there are all kinds of views you can inherit from. There's the generic API view. There's create, update, blah, blah, blah. So there's all kinds of different base classes, which are mix-ins. So they'll give you different functionality. In this case, all we need to do here is create a new user. So we can use the more specific create API view. We have to provide it a few things. So this is Django magic. We're basically going to associate a model with this view, which is the built-in user model. And we have to give it a serializer and so on, which we'll look at in a second. And then what we're doing here is this perform create is a built-in method that this class will end up calling, and we're going to override it and actually create our user there. We can jump in. We'll jump into the create API view. It's not. Let's see. Let's try this one. Yes. Okay, so I'm jumping in. So we're now in Django source code, and you can see that it inherits from two different classes. One is this create model mixin, and the other is a generic API view. And the thing that's different about this is that it's going to override the post method. So this generic API view, you can jump into that base class for all the generic views, and it should have, let's see here. It's going to inherit, sorry. So yeah, this will also inherit from the base, a base API view, which should have like the get, all the basic methods, get, post, etc. Where is that? It's a bit tedious to go through this, but let's see. Go even further. So here we go. Anyway, so this is how code navigation works with an object-oriented project, or really any project. You need to skip around to 30 different things to actually find anything. Let's see this view. Yeah. Anyway, we'll skip that. But if you can either read the documentation or just look stuff up and figure out that you need to override this perform create method, or you can jump around in the code until you have a good model and you can figure out that this is what you need to do. In either case, it's done for you right here. And then we have a serializer, and a serializer is just going to basically be the intermediary between the view and the model. And in this case, we only care about username and password because we're just creating a user. We could add other fields, like all these other fields associated with this user, like is super user, etc., email. So we could add a bunch of other stuff here, but in this case, we just care about username and password. Okay, so the user will basically make a post request, and in that post request body include username and password. that view will get called. It will pull out the username and password, and it will create a user in the database. So we can see that happen. So I'm going to create a super user, so it'll be a little easier for us to see what's happening. So Python manage.py create super user. Oops. All right, and now I'm gonna run the server. So Python manage.py run server. I can go here, and I'm gonna go to /admin. I can log in with my super user credentials. And because I have the token authentication app installed, we have this. We'll take a look at that in a sec, but we get users for free, and we see this user that just created. And this is a UI, again, this is a UI for that table. So we have username, email address, first name, last name, staff status. And we have all these fields here. So this is, you know, just UI for a database. We take a look here. Here's the password, which is hashed and salted. And then tokens, we don't have any tokens. So we created a user, but we don't have a token associated with that user. All right. All right, so once you create a user, you've created an entry, a row in the database, then you can make another request. So it will be possible to implement this as one step, but in this case, it's 2 steps. So once we create a user, then as a second step, we have to get that user's token. So once we create a user, it's going to be in the user database, and now we're going to make another request to this get token endpoint, and we're going to pass the username and password credentials, which should be associated with the user saved in the database, and Django will create a token and then send it back to us. And we can see that if we go to get token, we have this obtain auth token. So this is a built-in view that we're getting. So we can just import this. So REST framework, the auth token.views. So you can jump in here and see what that's like. So here it is right here. So you could write this view yourself. This is just a view, and we're importing it. So you can see if someone makes a post request to the endpoint, then it's basically going to grab the data from the request and serialize it. It's going to check if it's valid, just like you would do in any other view. And then it's going to grab the user, and then it's going to either create a token or get the token associated with that user. And then what can we expect as the response here?
It should give you the token that it created or found.
Yeah. So you should expect a JSON response, and that JSON response will be an object that has a key called token, and then the value will be whatever that token dot key, right? So where does this dot key come from? Comes from right here, which is a big string of a random text. So there's a token class, and that token class, you might guess, corresponds to this table. So let's take a look at that. Token, we have key, user, and created. And if we look at the table, we have key, user ID, and created. So yeah. So the key, it's a char field, and we have the properties here. Max length 40, primary key is true, which we just saw from the table. And then here, this is actually a one-to-one field, so not a one-to-many, but basically this is the same thing as doing like a foreign key. That's it. I mean, it's really just some third party implementing something that you've basically seen before. Okay, so you've submitted your username and password in a post request that creates a row in the user table. Then you make another post request to this get token endpoint, and it calls a built-in view that we've imported and used, and that's gonna either create, or it's basically gonna, the first time you call it, it's gonna create a token that's associated with that user, and then it's gonna send it back to you as a JSON object. And then the client at this point now has their token, and then once they have their token, that's what the rest of the app is going to care about. So any further requests you make to protected endpoints, those endpoints are going to check. They're going to, again, query the database and say, hey, here's the token. Is this a valid token? Is this a real user? If it is, then you'll be allowed through to access the resource. All right, so any questions about that process? Okay, so you guys should have gone through this process using Postman and doing everything kind of one step at a time. Now what we want to do is take that process and make it more user friendly. Basically, do everything using a nice, HTML, CSS, etc. UI. So that's what we'll do now. So I'm gonna, yeah, I'll create another repo here. So cd. All right, and then I'm gonna have index.html. And then we're also gonna have styles and app.js. I'm just gonna copy some of this code here. And styles.css. And then for now, we'll just have this in the app. So all the important stuff is going to happen in this JavaScript file. So I'm going to run this now, just using live server. And you can see the UI here. So this is it. Yeah, it's not it's not very good, obviously, but so you would really want to do this in separate pages, but it's all on one page just so we can see everything at once. But here is the login or sign up form. So the first time that you submit a request, you're going to be creating an account. So you're going to create the user, and then after that, if you're already signed up, then you can use this form to submit to the token endpoint, so you can get a token back. And then once you have your token, that is going to get used in further further requests so that we can actually access resources. So none of these buttons work right now because the JavaScript doesn't have anything. But that's the basic idea. Okay. So now we'll look at the sign up here. So I'm going to modify this app.js. And when I do that, I should now have the ability to create an account. So sign up or create an account or create a user in the database. So all this is now doing is we're just grabbing that form and then we're adding an event handler. And the event handler is gonna call handle auth. And then we're just gonna grab the username and password from the form. And then we're gonna call this sign up, which is just gonna make a post request. So we're gonna make a post request, and in the body, we're gonna send the username and password. So that's really all this is doing. So you've done the same thing in Postman, right? You just make a post request, and then you include a JSON object with the username and password, and you submit it. So we're just doing the same thing right here. So let's see if that works. All right, so I'm gonna go here, and I'm gonna click on the sign up box, and I guess EF. And should have had the network tab open, but let's see if this actually works. So I'm gonna go to the admin panel, and I can refresh this. I'm gonna go to users, and we can see that we have a new user here. So it's got a username, it's got a username and a password, but no tokens yet. Okay. So now what we want to do is we want to be able to actually get that token. So we'll go here to the app.js, and we got this modified thing. So now what we have is this event handler is going to have two paths. So if you sign up, which we just did, it's going to call this sign up method, which is going to do what we just saw, post request with username and password to create a new user. If the box is not checked, then we're basically logging in. So logging in means getting a token. So we'll call get token, which is down here. Very similar. It's going to use the same credentials, the username and password, and it's going to make a request to this get token endpoint, and it's going to return body token. So why can we expect this field called token?
Because you set it in the model or the views.
Yeah, because so we didn't actually create this view, but we're using this view, and we would find out either by reading documentation or looking stuff up or looking at the source code, we can see that this is going to send us back a JSON object with a key called token. And that token is going to have the thing that we care about. So that's why we're expecting this here. And then once we have that token, we're going to store it. And there are a few ways of doing this. This is the simplest way, so that's what we're going to use for right now. But you could also use cookies and stuff like that. But we're going to use local storage. So what is local storage?
Is this storage? It's not assigning a variable, so it's storing it on the actual computer, like using the RAM.
Okay. Good. Yeah. It is storing. So where does this come from? This local storage?
Is it in the browser?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
cloud.
It's part of the so-called browser API or web API. So you can see that. So actually, I'm just going to go here. I can open this up right here. I'm going to go to the console, and I can do window, right? So Windows got a whole bunch of stuff on it. So now I'm going to call window dot, what did I call set? Window dot local storage. So this is the thing that exists in the browser. So this is not like core JavaScript. This is just stuff that's available to you in the environment. So when you run JavaScript in the browser has this outer ring of things you can use, like local storage or alert. So it's got all these things that you can kind of use as though they were just a part of JavaScript. So this is basically like the equivalent of Python, the Python standard library, where you can import something without having to separately install it, and it's available to you. So this local storage thing we can use, and what are we calling on it? Set item. So we can do that here. So window dot local storage dot set item, and it's going to take a key and a value. So the function takes two parameters, test, and then the value. If I save that, it returns nothing, but it has a side effect, and the side effect is actually modifying something. So we can take a look at that in the web tools. We'll go to application and local storage. Let's see where it is.
It was on that second to last one in local storage.
Oh, was it? Okay. Oh, cool. Thank you. Yes, test right there. So there it is.
So that doesn't say to session storage then?
So there is session storage and local storage. There's a few different variations. There you go. Yeah. So basically, local storage is kind of available anywhere, and session storage is, I think, on a per tab basis, essentially. So in this case, session storage probably would be a better option. But we're mostly concerned with like the general concept and the process. The particulars of how we do that are not really important right now. But yeah, there's definitely a difference. And in the in the real world, you would probably also want to put this in a cookie rather than putting it in local storage anyway. Okay, so to go back to the diagram here, we have a form, and now we can use the form to grab username and password and make a post request to this endpoint. We can actually use the same form or a different form. In this case, this is kind of a lazy implementation. We're going to use the same form and then make a post request to a different endpoint using the same username and password. We're going to get a token back. And once we have the token, we need to somehow like persist that token in one way or another. how do we do that? Well, in this case, we're going to use local storage, but when we get to React, you'll see that we can also use state to do that. You could also use a cookie to do that. But one way or another, you're gonna have to save this token because you're gonna have to use it in other requests. And if you don't save it, then you would have to go through this process every single time you wanted to make a request. So to avoid that, we're gonna save this token. All right, and once we have that token saved, we're now gonna include it in the requests that we make to protected endpoints. All right, so we can sign up or log in, and once we have an actual token, then when we want to access an actual resource, we will go into local storage and grab that token. And when we have that token, now we have to use that token in the request. In this case, we're going to include an authorization header. And then the specifics here can vary depending on what you're doing, but this is very typical. So the authorization header is going to be a string, and it's going to start with token and then a space, and then your actual token. So we're going to pass that in here, include this as a header. And then when we make a request to, in this case, this random endpoint, we'll include that as a context. And as long as everything is wired up correctly, as long as we're basically like playing the game and fulfilling the contract that the Django REST framework is expecting, this should all work. Okay, so let's go here. And I'm going to actually go into the application. And I'm going to delete this. So now if I try to go to get access the resource, I basically get an error or a message saying I must log in first. So I already have the account created, so I will log in basically. I'm going to get my token. And I can see that this shows up here. So now when I try to make a request to this endpoint, the JavaScript code is going to go in, grab this value from local storage, and then pass that in as a credential. Let's see if that. Let me look at the network tab. Okay, so I've got an issue here. So let me take a look at that. So it's saying /wines/1. And I also, wine matching query does not exist. All right, so I'll do a little bit of debugging here. So I'll start with the URLs. So I'll start with the top level URLs, which is right here. And we have wines. So wines / and then if I go wineapi.urls, I have nothing. So wines1. Okay, so I think I know what's happening now. The problem is that there are no actual wines here. So if I change, let's see here. So let me go to the actual view. And I'm making a GET request, and I'm going to /wine/1. So it's gonna basically try to look for wine.objects.get, and if you try to get a particular a particular row and it doesn't exist, it's going to throw an error. So I'm going to add that here. I'm going to go to the setup data and go ahead and add that. So I'm going to stop this. I'm going to do Python manage.py shell. And I'm just going to execute this script and it's going to create a few wine objects for us. Exit. And then I'm going to run the server again. Okay. So hopefully this should work now. And there we go. So that was just the normal Django error that had nothing to do with this. So I'm going to refresh this, and I'm going to log out, and I'm going to go to application again. And oh yeah, I think the logout isn't hooked up yet, but logout is basically just going to be delete this token, because in this case, with this particular token implementation, which is very simple, it's basically just a. So let me rephrase that. So if you're using something like a JSON web token, which is more sophisticated, the JSON web token will have properties that tell you like how long the token is valid for and other things like that. There's also like blacklist. So if you have a token and then you want to invalidate the token, you can do that. So anyway, it can get more complicated, but in this case, this is a very simple token. So logging out is equivalent of just deleting this token from local storage. So let me go back here, and there should be one final thing here. So I'll save that. And now the logout will just delete this. And if I try to access this, I have to log in. I can log in again. I now have the token, and now I can use the token to access the resource. I can log out. I can create a new user. And I'm going to get the token for this guy. Oops. So I have the token here for this new user, and now I can access resources. I can also log out. So that's the basic idea. So under the hood, whether you're using a web UI or Django or a bash script or whatever, the flow is going to be the same. You create a user, we basically create a token associated with that user, and then get it, and we use that token for all further interactions. So it's somewhat complicated. There's a lot of steps, but it's every time you do it, it's going to be a similar kind of process. Are there any questions about that?
Could you show the file structure again in VS Code now that we're adding like the HTML and stuff? I just kind of want to see where
The front end or the back end?
I guess just like where you have everything. Do you, or is it your let's see.
So I have this. I have the back end. So this is the API and the database code are right here in this repo, and then the front end code is it happens to be in a separate repo right here.
Okay.
And so let me also, let's look at the network tab. So you can see right here also in the response headers from the API that we have all these access control allow origin stuff. So this is like the stuff that eliminates the core's errors, and that comes from the middleware, the custom middleware here that adds these headers. So that's why this is working. If we didn't have this middleware, because we're running the front end on live server, which is on port 5000, and it's making API calls to port 8000, I think. There would be a CORS error ordinarily, unless your API specifically allows that. Now, later on, once we get to kind of like the final setup for your projects, you're actually not going to have to worry about CORS errors, because everything's ultimately going to go to the same endpoint. But as you're doing local development, this kind of stuff is a bit of a headache. Okay, any other questions? All right.
Chad, from a structure standpoint, is it a best practice to keep things separate like that, like on the different repos, or would we kind of incorporate them all into like one tree on the like where you have everything built on Django?
Yeah, I mean, for a smaller project, I think you could probably get away with putting everything in one repo, but really it would be better to have things separated out. It's basically just an organizational preference. So the way that we'll do it, the kind of the default template that we'll use, everything will be in one repo, and then there'll be a Docker Compose file that ties everything together. But when you actually deploy it, you'll end up pushing. Sorry, you'll end up pushing all of your images up to your Docker Hub account anyway. So it won't actually matter when you're running this on the deployed EC2 instance. It won't matter like where stuff was. But to simplify some things for local development, yeah, it's all in one.
Would the setup be the same if you're using OAuth or Google or Facebook authentication?
Yeah, so some of that stuff is more complicated, because there are, you're using third-party stuff, and there's redirects, and yeah, it's definitely more complicated, but at some basic level, yeah, this is basically how it works. You're gonna create a row in a database, like a user's database, and then you're gonna have some other secondary credential that you're actually using. So you're gonna kind of exchange your primary credential for a secondary credential, a token of some kind, and then you'll use that. If you're using OAuth, you're basically using an intermediary, which makes things more complicated, but yeah, it's definitely possible to do, and people use OAuth in their projects. Okay. All right, and then the challenge for today is basically to make a front end for, so if you have a complete, if you completed the challenge from last class, then you can use that and just put a front end around it. So similar to the README for today. And if you don't, then you should do that first and then do this. And just keep it simple. You don't have to have a full front end implementation for everything. Like the example just has one endpoint. So I would just start there, and if you have time, you can expand it out. Okay. Let me stop recording.